We're now up to Daf Daled Amud Beis. Mutar miyad neneshe machlifit. Like we said before, the kusim after Pesach will swap their chametz for the chametz of the goy. So even though their own chametz they retained over the course of Pesach illegally against the Torah law, and therefore it should be osur after Pesach. But the Bryce is teaching me that we're allowed to eat their chametz after Pesach because this is not really their chametz, but rather immediately after Pesach, they will swap it with chametz of a goy. Although these people did not destroy their chametz, because it's a financial loss, they seek to minimize their transgression, and as soon as Pesach is over, they trade their own chametz for that of the goyim, which is permitted after Yontif. Savrua, the Gemara thought the following: Ha mani Rabbi Yehuda diyam chametz achar Pesach d'oraisa. Major machlok between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon at the beginning of the second parak of Psachim about whether or not chametz liachar Pesach is d'oraisa or d'rabbanan. Let's go according to Rabbi Yehuda. Uketani mipnei shemachlifin alma lo shavek eter v'yachal isur. Even on a d'oraisa isur, we're going to apply the principle that if they don't lose anything, they'd rather do with the kosher and Yoshua. So they don't want to violate the Isser of having enough from their own chametz. And therefore, what they'll do is, since chametz lachar Pesach is the oraisa, they're going to make this trade with the goyim to minimize their avera. And we can rely on that. And that should support Rava, who holds that a mumar who eats treif meat, but yet if all things are equal and he doesn't gain anything, he'll eat the kosher meat, we can just simply provide him with an examined knife so that the mumar doesn't have to go to any extra effort and let him share. So Gemara says, "Mimai, no. How do you know that this whole discussion about chametz liachar Pesach is based on the sheet of Rabbi Yehuda? Dilma, Rabbi Shimon, Dilma chametz liachar Pesach Rabbanan. Why are going we rely on the assumption that they made a swap with the goyim and therefore eat their chametz after Pesach? B'Rabbanan, but b'Deraisa lo makilin. You're talking about shchita. You haven't proven anything about shchita. How do you know that this person who's a mumar should be relied on for shchita? So what says, I don't get it. V'tehevi nami Reb Shimon. Let's say I grant you that this brisa is authored by, you want to attribute to Reb Shimon. Miktani shani omer hechlifu. It doesn't say that, we're going to assume that they did this swap, and we'll rely on it because we're only dealing with, in the maximum case, chametz shavuot pesach is only derabbanan like Reb Shimon. Mipnei shemachlifin ketani. The language of the Brisa indicates that they will swap their chametz with chametz of a Gentile. They're vade machlifin. And if it's vade machlifin, then we can rely on their chametz. And we'll say the following: Ma b'derabbanan lo shavek eter v'yachal isura. If we know that it's vade the machlifin, why? Because even with regard to the Rabbanan of chametz shavuot pesach, they are so makpid that they wouldn't lose out an opportunity to eat a beheter by swapping it with the guy. Is b'deraisa kolshken, and therefore, in the case of shchita of Rava, since they're only a mumar lit teyavon, therefore we're going to assume that if they have the knife in hand and the knife is kosher, they'll do a proper shchita. Let's bring a support for Rava from a brisa. The brisa says, "I call shochtim afilu kusi afilu orel afilu yisrael mumar." That we could rely on the shchita of a kusi and an orel We'll see what an Arel is in just a second. And a Yisrael Mumar. Okay, Yisrael Mumar is going to be relevant to Rava and support Rava that even though he's a Mumar, if he's a Mumar Liteyava, we can rely on his shchita. Hi, Arel Hechidam. What's the case of Arel? I leba mesu echav machmas mila. There's hemophilia in the family, and 2 or 3 children never died as a result of mila till they discovered that he was yellow, that he was suffering from blood disease. So now they get to the 3rd child and he's an Arel because they're not going to circumcise him. It's pikuach nefesh. Is Hay Yisrael Ma'al Yehu? I don't get it. He's a regular Jew. He's not even chayev in Mila. I would even go a step further and say he doesn't even have an Arel Salpi did. So you can't tell me we're talking about Mesu Achiv Machmas HaMila. Ela Pshita, it must be a case of Mumar Li Arlos, that he is a Mumar. He doesn't want to circumcise himself. Ukasavar, but the Tana of the Brisa holds that Mumar L'Dover Echad Lavi Mumar L'Kol Tarkula. Therefore, we can rely on his shchita. He's not going to eat nevela. And even though he's a mumar for this mitzvah, mainly the mitzvah milah, but he's not a mumar for other mitzvahs. That can't be Amos Seifa. The Seifa says Afilu Yisrael mumar. No, I'm sorry. Right, so that's with regard to Ora. Now let's see the Seifa. Afilu Yisrael mumar, hai mumar hechidami, imor l'davar acher, if he's a mumar for other isurim besides the isur nevela. In other words, as far as the isur nevela is concerned, we don't know that he's a mumar. He definitely eats kosher food. Shabbos Veselicht is hainu mumar liarlos. I mean, why is this different than a mumar liara? You're saying that he's a mumar for Shabbos, but he's not a mumar for the rest of the Torah, and therefore we rely on his shchita. We already established that by a mumar liarlos, he refuses to do milah, and yet we rely on his shchita. Because again, a mumar l'davar echad lavi mumar l'kol tarkul el lav mumar li'osa davar ukid. We have to say he's a mumar for nevela, meaning he eats nevela, he eats treifa, he eats non-kosher meat that was never shechted. And yet Rava says we can rely on his shchita because he's only a mumar le te'avon, only for to save himself the hassles and the bucks and the money. Right? Kosher meat is very expensive. But if he could get kosher meat at the same this, we gave him a knife, he shechts the animal, we can rely on his shchita. Lo. The Gemara says this is not a good proof. Lo. If he eats nevela and non-kosher food, we cannot rely on his shchita, and we can reject Rava. My timer, since he eats nevela on various occasions, we have to assume that he couldn't care less about shchita. Ella. So then, where does the Brisa apply the principle that we can rely on the mumar? Mumar lavodas kol chavim pilei playim. This is a Jew who never worships idols. And Yisrael mumar lavodas kol mutalecha mishchitasa. Imagine the man is idolater. He worships Zeus or I don't know what idol bear, and we can rely on his shchita. And that's exactly what Shmuel said. So it means that even though he's a mumar lavodas kol chavim, he's not a mumar l'kol tarkula. If he's a mumar l'nevela, then you can't rely on his shchita. He's not going to do a good shchita. Gufa Amar Rav Hanan. Amar Shmuel, let's check out Shmuel's statement. Yisrael mumar lavodas kol chavim. Mutar lechol mishchitaso. Where did Shmuel come off saying such a thing? And the answer is Achav, because Achav was a mumar lavodas kol chavim. And he made a pact with Yoshafat Melch Yehuda. What was the purpose of the pact? They would fight a battle against Ramos Gilad. Kemativ bel Yoshafat bel Yehuda shenene misudas Achav, this idol worshiper, made a suuda on behalf of Yehuda, of Yoshafat bel Yehuda. Yoshafat was a great tzaddik. Shenemar Yisbach lo Achav Son ubakar uliyam imo vaisiseu lalos el Ramos Gilad. So because of this massive shechita of sheep and cattle, which he created this beautiful Suda, and he invited the people, he invited the Melech, Yoshafat, and apparently Yoshafat ate from the meat, that we'll see. And this was done by Achav to try to seduce Yoshafat to go into like a bris, a military covenant to destroy Aram. Aram had what's the word I'm looking for? Sorry. Occupied. That's a popular word today, right? Who are those occupiers? So in Ramos Gilad, it was Aram. And Achav wanted to defeat Aram, but he needed the partnership of Yoshafat. So he made him this massive Su'uda, and Achav and his people went ahead and shechted. They were all idol worshippers, and apparently that's what Rav Anan and the name of Shmuel hold. Yoshafat ate from that meat. So you see that you could eat from meat that was slaughtered by what? By an Oved Avodas Kochav. In fact, the Gemara of Dilma Mizbach Sov Michalach. How do you know he ate from it? Maybe they went ahead, Achav, and they shechted it, but Yoshafat declined to eat from it. Vaisiseo Ksiv, the pasuk says that that's exactly how Achav seduced Yoshafat to join forces with him against Ramos Gilad. As we used to say, the way to a man's heart is through his stomach. V'dilma b'dvar. It doesn't say Vaisiseu because Yoshafat ate the wonderful steak and the barbecue, of Achav. That doesn't say. More says now, again, this is going to be rejected. Ein hasata b'dvar. That you cannot entice a person just with words. You got to give him something that he enjoys. In this case, steak. V'lo, is that true? V'aksiv ki yisischa achicha. I mean, in the Parsha of Maseches, it says that you convinced your brother, your fellow Jew, to worship an idol. And the Gemara says, "B'achilush siyah," that when the pasuk says "Yisischa achicha," it doesn't mean b'dvarim, but rather b'achila u'shesiyah. V'aksiv v'isisenu bo levalo chinam. Oh, this is a pasuk in Eov, I think. Just double check that. Yeah. Right. So the Satan, Kaviyachol, enticed Hashem to test Eov through Yisurim. And you can't entice God through eating and drinking. God doesn't eat and drink. So it had to be through Dvarim. The Gemara says, Lamala shining. As far as mortals are concerned, there is a possibility of enticing them without food or drink. What did I just say? Let me go over it again. With regard to the Holy One, there's no food or drink, so you entice him, capital H, him through words. That was what the Satan did to bring about Yisurim Shel Il. But with regard to human beings who can eat and drink, then the way to seduce them is through food and drink. So now we have a wonderful proof, Ravanan in the name of Shmuel, that Yoshafat was seduced, joined forces with Achav after he ate from the food that was shechted, the meat that was shechted by Achav. So Gemara says, no, Dilma Mishtei Ishtei, but Mechal lo Ochal. Right? Achav prepared a feast. There were drinks galore. Every type of drink you could imagine. There was a bar, there was wine, there was everything. Every type of wine, from the Golan, from France, from Spain, all the wines you want. And there was plenty of meat. But maybe Yoshafat was very careful. He only drank from the drinks and not from the meat. So the shechita of akum is not reliable. So Gemara says, Maisha shechita the amrina mumar lavoros kacham lavim mumar lakol tarkula. What are you saying? That Yoshafat drank the wine that was prepared at this beautiful lavish seuda by Achav? An idol worshipper's wine is awesome. So if you're arguing that Yoshafat refrained from eating the meat, but he only drank the wine, then you're going to have to assume that even though Achav worships idols, nevertheless his wine is permissible. Why? Because now, somehow the Gemara is assuming that Stam Yena, meaning an idol worshiper who comes in contact with wine, that's a whole new Easter. I don't know. It's a little difficult, but so in fact the Gemara nami. So therefore, if Yoshafat drank the wine of Achav, then he ate the meat of Achav. Hachi hashta. The Gemara says no. Shesiya Stam Yenamhu. Maybe Achav was an Ovid Kochavim, but there was no Easter to drink the wine of an Ovid Kochavim, which is Stam Yenom. Meaning, if the guy comes in contact with the wine, but it could be that Yoshafat drank Achav's wine, but he didn't eat from Achav's meat. So now we have to prove that Yoshafat indeed ate from Achav's meat. Ibai saying, I'll give you one answer. Lav urchi de malka lemishte below michla. Right, to say that the king would just drink but not eat. That's not urcha. And again, we agreed that Achav gave drink and Yoshafat certainly drank because Achav enticed him. Ibai saying another possibility, Vayizbach vayisaseu ksiv, b'mehisiso bizvicha. Right, from the fact that the word Vayizbach, which is Shchita, came right before Vaisiseu, his success in seducing him, it must be that it was Bizvicha, and Zvicha means Shchita. Gemara says, Vidilma Ovadia Zavach. Right, there was one single member of Achav's whole entourage who was reliable. His name was Ovadia. He was a Navi. Maybe he was the one who shechted the animals. How do you know that the idol worship is shechted? And the answer is Lo Rov Ksiv. It says that there were sheep and cattle in abundance. It couldn't be that Ovadia shechted all the sheep and cattle. Ovadia Lav Yisaf. V'dilma Shiva Lofim Zavuach. Apparently there were other Jews, and the Gemara is going to try to prove that from a pasuk that did not succumb to idol worship. Maybe they shechted the animals. It's V'sharti b'Yisrael Shivas Alofim Kol HaBerkayim Asher Lo Koru L'Baal. So I left 7,000 Jews because they did not kneel to Baal. God stated he would decimate the Jewish people of Achav's kingdom, but only those who engaged in idolatry. He would spare 7,000 righteous remaining among them. Right? And maybe they were the ones who slaughtered the animals. So the Gemara answers, well, we have to end soon. Tamure havi mitame mizevel. They weren't around. Izebel was after them to kill and destroy all these 7,000 who refused to worship Baal. So they were in hiding. They couldn't have shechted the animals. Dilma Gavri the Achav Hava Malvi. How do you know that all of Achav's people were all idol worshippers? Maybe there were some of them who were upright. Lo salkadai t'chsiv Moshel makshiv al dvar sheker kol mishosav v'shon. If a ruler hearkens to falsehood, all his servants are wicked. A pasuk in Mishlei. When a ruler has an inclination towards accepting falsely malicious reports, all of his servants turn wicked. And we're going to derive from this that since Achav was a wicked idolater, it's presumable that the members of his staff followed in his evil ways, and that the only exception was the righteous Ovadia. The Dilma Gavri the Oshofat Nami Lahavi Malia. Maybe it was the people of Yoshafat who were not such tzaddikim. Zavuach Gavri the Achov, V'achol Gavri the Yoshafat. Zavuach Ovadia, Achol Yoshafat. When the other people in Yoshafat's entourage who were not upright, then Yoshua demurred, he would not eat from the shechita. But when Ovadia got up and he shechted the animals, that's when Yoshafat ate it. Lo salkadai, that can't be. Mida Moshel makshiv al dvar sheker kol mishosav v'shoim. The pasuk says, if a ruler hearkens to falsehood, all his servants are wicked. Chol dvar emes mishosav tzaddikim. If, however, a ruler hearkens to words of truth, his servants are righteous. And therefore, we have every reason to assume that the men in the entourage of Yoshafat were certainly righteous. Affecting Gemara v'dilmos of Gavri the Achav. Maybe that which was shechted by the people of Achav, that's the food that was eaten by Achav. I guess it had a stempel on it. This is Achav's people. But that sheep and cattle that was shechted by the people of Yoshafat's entourage, that's where Yoshafat ate from it all. And the Gemara says here on the top of Daf Hey, Lo avi maflig nafshe minei. Apparently, Yoshafat trusted Achav. So we're going to have to prove, which we'll leave for tomorrow, in Mirz Hashem, that Yoshafat and Achav had a relationship of brotherhood and mutual trust, and therefore, no doubt about it, that when Achav served meat to Yoshafat, he and his men ate from that feast, even though everything was prepared by Achav and his people. And from the fact that Yoshafat partook in this feast, we derive the conclusion that a mumar li'avodas kol chavim with regard to the rest of the Torah is not called a mumar, and we can rely on his shechita. So this is where we'll stop here on Daf Hey. Okay, wishing you a great day. Thank you so much.